Thank you so much, Santiago, and it's a great pleasure to be here today. Good morning to everybody. Buenos dias. I'm Michael Shifter. I'm the president of the Inter-American Dialogue, and it's a great pleasure and privilege to moderate this panel, which is part of the Decoding Latin America 2022 focus in the series. This session looks at how major non-financial companies are deploying strategies to take advantage of the social, political, and business environment in 2022 and look at some of the trends in key industries. And we're very fortunate today to have a first-rate panel who will be sharing their views on this critical question. And please let me introduce them first in the order in which they will speak very briefly, and most of the session will be devoted to a question and answer exchange discussion. But first, it's a pleasure to introduce Rina Quijada, who's the Vice President for Latin American Business Development and Research and Analysis, Oil Markets, Midstream, Downstream, and Chemical with IHS Markit in Houston. We also have Marcus Schmidt, who's the Associate Managing Director at Moody's Investor Service. Joe Bormann, who is the Managing Director, Deputy Regional Group Head of Latin American Corporates at Fitch Ratings, based in Chicago. And finally, we're very happy to have Diego Ocampo, who's the Senior Director and Sector Lead at Corporate Ratings Standard & Poor's, based in Buenos Aires. So before we turn to our excellent speakers for their initial comments, if you please allow me to share a few framing thoughts about the region's political environment. And first, I think there's agreement that there's widespread dissatisfaction with the performance of democratic governments and democratic systems throughout the region. The Latin American Barometer poll survey really reveals a very high level of unhappiness with the performance, a lack of trust in basic democratic institutions. And the discontent, I think, derives from a failure, perceived failure, at least on the part of many Latin Americans, of governments to deliver not very good outcomes, high levels of inequality, persistent inequality, which is the Achilles heel and remains the Achilles heel of Latin America, deficient public services, deficient infrastructure, very bad education and health systems, high levels of corruption, and all of these issues and problems were exacerbated and came to the fore and were laid bare by the pandemic. But the region was not in great shape even before the pandemic, even though it's worse today on many of these different dimensions. This situation, I think, has produced a high level of disenchantment and a search for alternative political options, not necessarily going to the right or going to the left, but really being anti-establishment, criticizing elite groups, whether justifiably or not, which is, I think, the nature and definition of populism, which can be authoritarian, and many times it is, but sometimes it's not. It doesn't have to be authoritarian, but certainly there is a populist kind of impulse and tendencies that we see in a number of countries in the region. I should mention that this is certainly not a situation that's peculiar or only applies to Latin America. This is a global trend and a global phenomenon. And of course, we see the same thing here in the United States. So this is not just Latin America, but I think it's important to focus on the nature of this problem in the region. We have increased demands, high expectations, which are fueled by this discontent and the proliferation of social media, which I think sometimes increases the polarization, since there's a lot of misinformation and the like that's that circulated in social media. At the same time, there's limited physical space, and it's much harder to govern these days, and that produces high levels of uncertainty and volatility and turnover in many governments in Latin America. So continuity is a critical challenge. And finally, let me just go through very quickly some of the more particular cases as I see them anyway. Chile, I think, is the most striking. We're having elections on Sunday. Really the collapse of traditional political parties and the turn to both the right and to the left. And the candidate on the right, Cast, is probably the populist in the race. A month or two ago, he had zero chance of winning, and his chances have increased considerably, really playing on the high crime and immigration issue in Chile and the violence there. And again, this is a classic case of discontent looking for alternatives. In Colombia, we have elections in May of next year. Gustavo Petro leads the polls. There's high levels of discontent there. We'll see if there's a centrist option, an alternative that emerges that gets some traction before May and perhaps can compete effectively with Petro in a second round vote. In Brazil, we have elections less than a year from now. Lula has, according to all the polls, has the best chance of returning to the presidency. I wouldn't rule out that Bolsonaro could be reelected if things improve considerably in Brazil and COVID recedes as an issue, and there are more problems with Lula. Or also there could be a centrist option, although very, very difficult in a polarized environment, that could emerge if Bolsonaro really craters. Somebody from more in the centrist sort of arena could emerge. In Peru and Ecuador, we have considerable governance challenges. Guillermo Lasso started off very well, very promising, impressive, but are now facing very serious governance problems, also crime, prison riots, and the like. And Pedro Castillo, the outsider, is also struggling in Peru since she started on July 28th. I think the question and concern is more about competence and capacity than ideology, but certainly he is struggling and has had a Congress that's very, very difficult to deal with. And finally, just in Mexico and El Salvador, I think two cases where we have two leaders, AMLO and Bukele, who are very popular still, taking advantage of failed political performance of previous governments. And that's really they're really taking advantage of that. So with those initial comments, certainly an uncertain and complicated outlook, at least as I see it. Others may disagree, but certainly there are opportunities within Latin America, and I think that's what we want to focus on today. But certainly taking into account some of these broader contextual questions. So with that introduction, it's a pleasure to turn it over to Rina to get us started, and then we'll go to Marcos, Joe, and Diego. So Rina, the floor is yours.
Unmute. Thank you so much, Michael, for that excellent introduction, and for Latin Trade for organizing this platform. I think it's a fantastic opportunity to exchange some views on the region. Today, more than ever, I think your comments, Michael, are so important for the region. Coming out of COP26 and with all the different overviews on commitments and targets and challenges of what we need to do on climate change, the how is really where we are struggling country by country in a diverse region as Latin America. So when someone asks me about Latin America, I have to, ask them, what country are you talking about? Because the diversity in language, culture, food, sources of energy, and global interaction, is so diverse. But I think today, if we look at Latin America, we will have to kind of take from what's happening globally, because as we see there's a global commitment to move in a certain way in the energy and climate change transition. So Latin America will move also. It's just dependent on where each country is and what political, view the country has. So starting with the US all the way down to Patagonia, we will be involved in this exchange of ideas and policies, government, and as you said, going through all these different presidential elections, we need to keep a close eye, even if we are in a different industry, even if we are in energy, in mining, in solar, wind, we need to be aware of the political changes. So with that, I pass it over to my colleague, Marcos.
Great. Thank you, Rina. Marcos.
Thank you, everyone. And I'd like to thank on behalf of Moody's for letting me participate in this panel here. And I agree, next year looks very busy on the political arena. And that could create, as we're very used to here in Latin America, to create noises on the markets. And we will probably see volatility on companies' results going forward. But in a very brief summary here, what we are thinking is that despite the noises, we will still see a pretty solid credit quality for non-financial companies in Latin America in 2022. And the reason for that is that in our view, most companies have done a pretty good job during the pandemic in refinancing debt, accessing international bond markets when rates were and are still actually at record low levels, and creating opportunities for companies here to issue large amounts of debt, refinancing their balance sheets. Companies also have cut costs, have done a pretty good job, let's say, during the pandemic, and have acquired benefits that will last into the next few years. So that will protect many of them to face the volatility that could be expected in Latin America because of the political. I'm more, let's say, specialized in Brazil, and I think we are pretty used to that scenario and the cyclicality of elections every 4 years. So in summary, I think that we'll do find what we can discuss in more depth during the panel here.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Joe.
Yeah, I've been around Latin America following corporates for 25 years, and Michael used some words that I wrote down, and a lot of them grabbed my attention: widespread dissatisfaction, discontent, uncertainty, complicated. And I find that is one of the things I've noticed for 25 years in Latin America, that we had the Asian crisis in 98, 99, the run up to the election of President Lula, the Argentine crisis in the early 2000s. So there's always something going on in the region. It's certainly a fun place to work. Looking back, I would say that I agree with Marcos that the companies have been actually, in my view, in a defensive posture since the beginning of 2019. So really cutting back on capital expenditures with the election of President Lopez Obrador and some of the maybe non-conventional policies that we saw him follow. I feel like many of the corporates kind of pulled back on their capital expenditures, saw the social unrest at the end of the year, end of 2019. Chile and Colombia, another reason to kind of pull back. Last year during the pandemic, I think throughout our portfolio, we saw drops in capital expenditure levels of between 20 to 40% across the board. So companies really tried to preserve their cash flow by cutting back with their investments. The first half of this year was really a great year for the companies, and we believe that kind of like the investments in the capital expenditures would grow by about 30%. So the corporates are in a great position to kind of move forward. The question is, why would they move forward? Why not just distribute the cash to the shareholders, buy back shares? What are the alternatives? Right now for us, we rate 600 corporates across the region. Around 250 of them have international ratings. So about 70% of the portfolio has a stable outlook, 10% positive, 20% negative. And that's a sharp contrast to the end of 2020 when 40% had a negative outlook and only 60. So the corporates are ready to go. There's just nowhere to go. I mean, if you look at all of the policy uncertainty that Michael laid out, I mean, the talking points by country are very long in terms of the challenges. If you think of just say the global scene and issues like widespread inflation, the supply chain, when you look to China, you see kind of an energy crisis, you see uncertainty about the construction sector. Like there's kind of a lot of dark clouds. And on top of that, the sovereigns aren't in a very good position to help out the corporates. They're very extended. Currently, 6 of the 18 sovereigns that we have rated in the region have negative outlooks. And that doesn't include sovereigns that were downgraded this year, like Peru and Colombia. So I'd say like macro complicated, regional complicated. Corporates are ready to go, but where do they go? Great question.
Great, thank you. Well, I hope we'll be able to answer that question. Diego, let me turn to you.
I'm knocking on wood here because we're very well past COVID, and no one is talking about COVID anymore. And that's pretty much what we're seeing so far since the past, I would say, couple of quarters. Companies are starting to resemble what they were before. So we're starting to get, again, concentrated in what you said, basically, political agenda, policy making, the macro sovereign related issues are always a big portion of the analysis in Latin America. So, and yeah, we have midterm elections in Argentina past Sunday with a very shocking result, I would say, very much influenced by COVID and lockdowns and discomfort, I would say. Sunday, presidential in Chile, elections in Chile, as you say, Michael, with a potential very big swing there. And you have a lot of things coming up in 2022, potentially in Chile with the constitution, the bill for the new constitution, the potential changes in royalties for mining companies as well. The third withdrawal of pension funds that may affect the funding, the domestic funding of corporations there, probably presidential election in Colombia, as you say, and Brazil in October like next year. So a lot of that will alter some way the direction and investment decisions and financing decisions. As my colleague said, companies were taking advantage of that. I would say 2020 and 2021 were cautious years. We're starting to see CapEx and M&A activity picking up very clearly. And what's ahead is, I would say, probably a bit difficult 2022 with all the hurdles that we mentioned, with inflation, global supply disruption, these potential changes to the gaming, to the policy-making game, and maybe the world growing slower, right? So that's kind of the setup for what's coming, and we can talk in more depth in the next 40 minutes.
Okay, thank you very much. Very, very helpful and very interesting comments by all of you. Why don't we kind of pursue some of these questions now in a discussion? This my first question, maybe for Rina, and I don't know if Diego wants to comment or anybody else, but certainly, you know, when I look at all the articles that are now being written here, certainly here in Washington, about Latin America and looking at opportunities, the word, you know, the term nearshoring is kind of sort of stands out. Just seems to be just endless articles kind of stressing that this is a great opportunity, that this is, given the kind of global environment and the impact of, you know, supply chains and everything else, and the question of rivalry with China and just a lot of factors. And I guess my question is, how, to what extent, is this really, I think so far it's really unproven as far as I know. There's a lot more talk than actually any evidence that it's actually happening. But I just would like to get the perspective, some of you, about what do you think this is a real opportunity, or are some of the problems that I identified, and I think many of you share, in terms about the list of challenges, as you mentioned, just make it very difficult for this to take advantage of this kind of notion of nearshoring. So let me start with Rina. Anybody else who wants to jump in?
Right. Thank you. Great question. And when we talk about nearshoring versus, all those years that we dependent on imports from everywhere else, in this globalization that happened, I think there's an important piece, which is the logistics of transportation. Mm-hmm. So today, because delayed effect from COVID, this whole transportation, containers, shipping, transportation, which is necessary in order to replace one with the other, is completely disrupted and extremely expensive. So, when we're talking a price increase, we're not talking, 10%, 20%, 30%. It's probably 400% increase if you can find a container to ship some of your products. So I think this whole COVID transportation logistics disruption, if you take it out of the picture, the how do you do it? It becomes more manageable. But with that, and we expect this to continue in 2022. It's not going to be a quick fix. So the fact that you could go to Lowe's or Home Depot today and order something, but they say it'll get to you in 90 days, that will continue to affect the way we do business, and we continue with the normalization of a pre-COVID scenario. So that's my take on that. I think everything that we talk about today, I believe, in 2022 all the way to the next few years, will be touched by the energy transition and the decarbonization. So even policies. So, oh yes, you can bring this, you can move this from Mexico to the US, but there's going to be a carbon tax imposed. What is this? Oh, well, we don't know yet, but we're working on it. So it's uncertain times, great opportunities for Latin America, because in the energy transition, Latin America got an advantage because it's got so much hydro, and it's got so much, forest, and it's got. So if we turn the table around, I know we're looking at corruption and policies and all this stuff. I'm looking at it as finally an opportunity for the region to move forward, because in the pre-era of hydrocarbons, the region was poor on hydrocarbons. And even Argentina, with Vaca Muerta being so huge, they never got to it at the right time. So now it's going to be difficult. And that $100 billion committed to the region in 2009 and 2009, we're still waiting for that. So I think the influx of fresh new capital into the region will be positive and will foster growth. So I'm very optimistic about the region because of these factors that are completely outside of the control of the region, right? Mm-hmm. So it's not because the region is doing anything. It's not because, Mexico is looking at the policy to change the trade scenario. No, it's going to be affected even more today and tomorrow with changes in the environment that's going to affect it positively. That's my take on that.
Right. Great, thank you. I want to come back to you on some of the questions you raised, but first want to maybe get any other thoughts on nearshoring. I don't know if Diego wants to.
Yeah, I was thinking on a recent, I would say, poll that we did in every region. We contact companies and try to understand better what was going on this global supply disruption, and how all those issues were affecting their ability to deliver, transport, wherever. And it is kind of a thing that for the US and EMEA, companies are a bit more concerned. They think it's going to impact, the inflation is going to impact cost much harder. Probably it's going to take longer as well, probably well into 2023. But they seem to be passing cost increases well to customers. The note in Latin America was a little bit more optimistic. I'm not sure if we are optimistic people by nature, but companies were not that worried. Obviously, the issue popped up and probably is cutting revenue growth elsewhere. Autos for sure, consumers for sure, retail for sure, and those type of heavy machinery companies. But perhaps because the region is less integrated into the less open, I mean, 10, 12, 15% of GDP is imports and exports. That might be something, I would say, an advantage. Obviously, you have the cost increases in transportation. As Rina said, it takes probably it costs 6 times what it used to transport goods from China to North America or Europe, all the other way around. It's a very important topic, but it doesn't impact much I would say the big cost structures of big players in Latin America so far. That was our initial take. It is probably something to monitor very closely in 2022. And as far as commodity side of it, we're still on the safe zone. Commodities are very well performing. Probably some softening into the 22 for some of them. Probably pulp. Probably iron ore. We're still seeing it, and some others. But in a ballpark, levels are very good.
Great, thank you. Don't know if Marcos or Joe would like to weigh in on this question of nearshoring. If anything you want to add?
Yeah, I would say I feel like we're searching for something positive to say, so I'm going to find something here positive to say.
Sure.
That just say the transportation bottlenecks that are out there. I feel like they're very positive for commodities throughout 2022, and I mean I think it's important to have a positive commodity environment for Chile and for Peru relative to some of the unrest and the political uncertainty. That when you look at like copper having roughly 1 week of inventory in the warehouses globally, like a small shift in that number, I mean, that's an extremely small amount of inventory, can really give a nice bump to Codelco and to the Chilean economy. And very similarly, like zinc, you're kind of moving into a more balanced market, but prices are still elevated because the zinc that's out there is in the wrong location and can't move quickly to a better location where the right demand is, or conversely is taking too long to get to China, which would be a natural market. So I feel like there's a lot of negatives with the inflation, particularly as it relates to Brazil, but like positively, when you're more commodity dependent, like Chile or Peru, there's a little bit of a benefit as it allows them an extra 12 months to kind of work through some of the more complicated issues in those two countries right now.
Great, thanks. Marcos, you have any thoughts about this?
Yes, specifically on commodities and trying to link with the political environment, we have a little bit of concern that, that there could be policy changes, especially in Chile and Peru, with the probable change in Chile, Peru as well, with the very delicate political environment right now. That there could be changes in policies that could hurt companies in the sense of increasing royalties on mining, for example. So this is something we have on our radar here for the let's say next couple of years, and considering the political volatility in the region.
Great, thank you. I wanted to ask the other question again, and I think Standard & Poor's has done a lot of, did a report on this as well, on ESG. And it seems that a lot of that, at least Latin America, is a very, very small percentage of the global investment in ESG. And I'm just wondering if there were opportunities there, whether you saw the region as making some adjustments in order to attract investments, and that seems to be a trend that's gaining a lot of ground globally. And to what extent is Latin America kind of responding in a in a useful way to make itself a little bit more attractive on those issues? So I don't know if Diego, you want to start on that, since I know that Standard & Poor's did a report.
Yeah,
last
what
year.
a big topic.
Well,
Yeah, everyone is talking and doing everything. I think the region, when you compare how companies are dealing with ESG issues in Latin America vis-a-vis other markets, I would say they are not running that behind Europe in terms of efforts, organization, and mindset. But definitely they need to communicate better and be more transparent on what they do, what they're doing, because that is something that obviously that they needs to be tackled, needs to be earmarked, and we're trying to do that, basically trying to add transparency to those efforts and how companies compare vis-a-vis others in other regions. Then in terms of goals and how companies are being more emphatic in determining what they're going to do in terms of decarbonization trends and those type of things, I would say since COVID, I think probably COVID has been a breakthrough in terms of how companies are, well, stop messing around. We're going to set these goals, write in paper to the market, and align the whole company to deliver in those objectives. That has been a pretty, I would say, strong foot in ESG. And we think it's going to be a very interesting time, because obviously there are very pollutant industries such as metals and mining and oil and gas, which are under the scrutiny. We have had accidents that were very important as well. So the market and investor community is eager to understand how companies are dealing with this, and that will be our job.
mm-hmm. Right. Great. Are there any cases that particularly strike you as being promising in terms of, where certain companies in certain countries?
When you compare pollution levels in the mining industry, for instance, in Chile, they are vis-a-vis they are very well compare very well to Europe. When you compare the environment footprint of pulp making in the region is also among the best of breed. Packaging as well. Very large industries are very well set to deal with this, but obviously they need to deal with with a portion of it, and definitely need to improve transparency and communication.
Great, thanks. Other comments on ESG from?
I think it might be topic number one. Well, like when you mentioned, where are people putting their cash? I actually feel like if you don't have projects, you're really cleaning up your ESG message. Like if you look globally, there was 200 billion of, let's say, ESG, like so green sustainability or sustainability linked bonds. And 3 years ago, up to 300 billion, 600 billion. Last year in Latin America for corporates, we had 90 billion of issuance. 400 of them were either green sustainability or sustainability linked, so 5%. Through the first 7 months of this year, 30% of the bonds from the region have been sustainability linked or sustainability or green. So it's like topic number one for a number of industries. Interestingly, if you look at like JBS's quarterly reports from the third quarter, they spend the first 23 pages out of 34 talking about it. So what they're doing to decarbonize the supply chain, so that means like give additives to the cattle to reduce the methane emissions, or work on the traceability of the suppliers, of their suppliers. Very similarly, like Vale spends 6 out of the first 13 pages talking about what they're doing on the topic. And for them, it would be like create new products like briquettes to replace pellets, where you reduce the energy. So like your scope 1 or 2 from the production by 80%, and then to reduce the scope 3 emissions of steel companies by 10%. So I think whether or not it's cement, oil, all of these industries, you really have to have a very coherent message. I think we saw from COP26 that 30 of the leading financial institutions basically made a pledge not to lend to agricultural industries, which are very closely related to deforestation. So there's a lot of push from investors on the topic. So you better get organized if you're a corporate.
Great, thank you. Rina, I think you want to.
Yeah, brief comment here. For me, I haven't followed the region for like 30 something years. I'm amazed of the response time. If we look at 2019 or 2020, I actually had to explain to some of my clients what is ESG. So, to come quickly from 2019 to 2021 in the middle of COVID, where we couldn't really travel that much, communications, great virtual, but face-to-face in the business is really powerful in these issues. To come this far, this quick, I thought that was the most amazing result of the job that has been done on the sustainability issues and governance, particularly with your comments, Michael, with saying you started with the high level of corruption. So that's one of the big things that you have to deal with in ESG, and the fact that everyone jumped quickly and is doing a fantastic job, in my view. We speak a lot to CEOs in the region. We have conferences and we talk to CEOs, and like we've been saying, nobody leaves the room without talking about ESG, about energy transition, about how to get there, how to get to their commitments, because everyone is committed, right? 90% of world GDP is committed to, net zero carbon, be it 2060, be it 2050, whatever. How do you get there? And that's where we spend most of the time. And coming from this energy sector, we have unparalleled groups of companies that have technology that can deal with big scale. This is what we're looking for, big scale. When you look at carbon capture storage, we're looking at all this stuff is billions. We're not talking about, we used to talk about, okay, we have to spend $200 million to do this. Now we're talking billions. So that's the reason I think once we open that investment, people are clear about where they're going. Because right now, I think 21, 22 will be years of how do we get there? What are the roadmaps we need to get there? Once that's over, we see the money pouring in. I just don't see how this is not going to hit every different sector in the economy. And if the economy is doing even a little bit better, people have money in their pocketbook and they can, they can spend. I think social unrest is a little bit more manageable. And just going back to a comment that someone made about inflation, and the positive reaction in Latin America. I think one of the big differences between talking to Europeans or North Americans about inflation is in the region, Latin America is so used to inflation being thousands of percent, is that if you have a 6%, 10% inflation a year, you're happy, you know, it's manageable. You want it at 3%, that's fine. But I think the fact that they're so used to dealing with the issue of inflation, and the US, we're not. I mean, we're seeing the beef prices going up and gasoline, and we're all panicking. But go to Europe. I mean, gasoline in Europe is, you know, twice what we pay in the US. So I think it's just very relevant to the country that you're talking to, and that's my take on the inflation.
Great, thank you. Marcos, did you have any thoughts on ESG?
Yes, I agree with Diego has said. When we compare, let's say, the environmental part of the three letters here with Latin America, with, let's say, US and Europe, companies don't compare that bad. Where I see actually more room for improvement, it's on the G part, on governance, really, where there had been emblematic cases of corruption where it involved very large corporates here in Latin America. And I think there's room there for progress. We have seen some progress. We have recently upgraded, for example, JBS to investment grade. We have recently upgraded Petrobras as well. And in those two cases, there weren't improvements in governance, really, to try to avoid future cases of, let's say, corruption. We wouldn't be able to execute those upgrades. So I think those are very nice examples of improvements in governance, and for sure part of the ESG here topic, right? Right.
Yeah, all of you are cheering me up a lot, so I really appreciate it. But you know, what I'm hearing, and maybe I'm not, you know, is that the corporates are, you know, making adjustments and responding, and certainly are attuned to sort of global, you know, some of the global trends that we're seeing. But at the same time, just wondering how people reconcile. I mean, if you look at the two biggest countries, Brazil and Mexico, you don't have, it doesn't seem to me that you have governments, national governments in place that are, you know, maybe have got the message. And I'm just wondering to what extent you're seeing, you know, policies and incentives coming from national governments to try to promote and encourage the direction that seems to be, you know, where everybody else is going. It seems to be sort of a little bit counter. And I was wondering if anybody, you know, has any thoughts that's beginning to change, or maybe there are, you know, some incentives, but not enough, or just how people sort of judge not only Brazil and Mexico, but, you know, just, you know, and other governments as well. Just to what extent are government policies kind of, you know, sort of pushing and encouraging the moves that I think all of us agree are, you know, not only important, but inevitable. I mean, that's where it's going.
I almost wonder if the question is almost a little bit backwards, or the thinking is different. I actually think, like, if you look at COP26 and you see really some important governments not being leaders, I actually think it starts at the back end, that the leaders in this process tend to be the investors. And that really started in Europe. I'm not sure what my colleagues would think, but like many of them, I've been out there for decades. And really about 2 or 3 years ago, you started hearing the words ESG and what are companies doing? And in Latin America, they were doing nothing. And you heard that when you were in Europe on an investor roadshow where you're talking about the credit. So I feel like it's actually an investor and now banker driven process. But then the corporates are reacting to that very strongly with their processes. Then you got the governments kind of being drug along because it's harder maybe for them to coordinate their big actions with their goals of being reelected and maybe the impact. So I feel like maybe if you looked at it from being investor driven. Corporates are responding because if they want to be active in the capital markets and get access to financing from various sources in the future, they better have a plan in place. So I would say I'm a little more pessimistic about the government's leading us there, as opposed to what I see as very strong investor driven demand for behavior, corporates responding, and then the government's maybe getting the benefit.
Great. That's very helpful. Any other thoughts on that? On government? I mean, our government's just kind of asleep, and then, you know, it's being driven by other variables, and they'll get there eventually, but it's not that governments are being very helpful in sort of spurring this process.
Well, I think it's irreversible now. I mean, I think, like I said, 90% of the global GDP, 150 countries are committed one way or the other, whether they get there or not. You know, I think it's right now, like I said, the process is, are you, so this train has left. Are you on any of these wagons? Are you in the last one, the middle one, the front one? What are you doing to get there? We are headed in the same direction.
Right.
And like every other thing, you know, the Me Too movement, you know, there's just a lot of movements that are started from down in people talking to each other. The pressure is going up. So I agree with Joe completely. This is a financial type movement where huge investments are needed. And the banks, the financial community, you know, is going to look at your balance book, and it's just going to be, is it going to be just profit or profit on planet? What is it going to be today? And I think that's really what's moving it. And the conversation has changed, Michael. It's changed completely. We go into a boardroom. I remember the conversation, you know, 5 years ago, 3 years ago, and now it's changed completely. Even in the chemical side. So now I have to explain to people, what is green hydrogen? Because we know hydrogen has no color, but now we got green, blue, brown, magenta. What is this? So for us, you know, I being in this business for so long, one of my jobs is kind of communicating and providing insight to companies to see where are they and where they want to position themselves in this transition. But you know, the governments, I think, are just going to react, you know, be it Brazil, be it Mexico, and we all know, we all have the background of what the government in Brazil doing, what is it not doing in Mexico, you know, and perhaps, just this is a thought, perhaps not being too active in certain areas in Mexico is going to provide a quantum leap to renewables, to rather than, you know, so I think countries like Chile that have been, you know, very, poor in energy sources that were conventional in the past, now are taking the lead on renewables. So, and lots of investments in hydrogen, and because that's, you know, we're going to try to replace the C in carbon for the H in hydrogen. So that's really what we're trying to do. And I see it as a, you know, a transition, and Latin America was very slow in reacting to some of the other energies. Perhaps now it'll be faster.
Interesting. Great. Any other thoughts on this?
And I think Chile is really the exception here in Latin America in regards of government support to transition to you know, a pollution-free environment, right? But I agree that on the other countries, we will probably see the private sector leading the way.
Great. Diego?
No much to add. I'm more concerned on governments getting in the way of companies' performances rather than not being favoring the transition. But what I'd be more concerned on social demands that trigger fiscal spending that is financed with corporate taxes or some other sources. I think that's the avenue that I need to watch on in the next 2 years, probably in most of the countries.
Great. I want to thank you all. I want to ask a question. I mean, I think one of the most dramatic impacts and negative impacts of the pandemic has been on education. And just some people, talking about a lost generation, and just people, that just weren't able to continue schooling. A lot of people have dropped out of school, and just the critical importance of technology in education, which I think was really underscored by this, by the pandemic. And I'm just wondering about if you see any movement in terms of tech, and especially in tech investment, and especially as it relates to education. Is that an area where you see some potential growth or opportunities? Anybody?
You mean by, I definitely see companies being far more aware of people needs and labor needs, and
Right.
being way more active in delivering cross-skilling
Right.
material, and trying to upskill the personnel, and
Right.
be very mindful of their needs. I think that's a big change, but still, when you look at some of the biggest markets, we have a very serious problem in hiring and retaining labor coming. And perhaps Joe knows more than me on this, but the US is dealing with an unusual spike in job quitting, and
Sure.
and that is happening everywhere, in different levels, and perhaps that is signaling that companies or the corporate world needs to reshape and adapt to whatever come next, because the newer generations are different from the old ones,
Mm-hmm.
and need different things.
Mm-hmm.
And perhaps we need to rethink the whole thing, how people educate, how companies deliver the job proposition to personnel, and be more flexible.
Great. Joe, you wanna add to that? Thank you, Diego.
I think Diego summed it up. I mean, my wife's a teacher, and it's been a challenge for her. And then from her perspective, the good news is her students all have access to technology like we're using today.
Mm-hmm.
So even though they're kind of getting, I don't want to use the word lost, or they're going to struggle to some degree for 2 years, it is a serious issue, as Diego pointed out, like just say the lack of widespread access to technology throughout the region, and the lack of maybe talent for the companies that need to be hiring a lot of people. It's a big challenge. I don't know if we have the answers right now.
But do you see any companies that are moving in that direction to invest and be more engaged in that sector?
Yeah, I don't have any super specific examples. I mean, if you look at like the ESG, you'll see large contributions to the community, and I'm not sure what percentage gets redirected to education. Some of the larger companies that we work with in Peru, like an Intercorp, are working to have a more, let's say, mobile hybrid working environment, which will help with issues like just the long commute time in Lima. But at the same time, they do have a large percentage of their workforce still that doesn't have access to the technology at home or the high-speed internet that they need.
Right. Okay, I don't know if Marcos or Rina want to comment on this.
I just have a brief comment. It's not, I don't follow the education sector in great detail. I just wanted to comment that I think COVID changed many things of our daily lives. Unfortunately, in the education side, it probably did more negative than positive. But I think in the next 2 years, we'll have to readjust and adapt. And it opened up opportunities as well as closed some others. But I think the fact that the work environment is also going to change. Parents can actually choose what time they can go to work, and they could probably drop off their kids at school, spend more time with them, teaching them when they come back from school. This is a whole new environment, not only education, but work environment, health, So I think we're going through a transition. Some negatives will occur. And I think in the education side, especially in the US, I can tell you that, some of the meals that the kids were getting from going to school was the only meal they got. So malnutrition, not education, but malnutrition. So it's a very complex subject matter, Michael, but I think
Right.
it's a wonderful question to keep in mind and to keep pushing the ESG in those areas, not only on the work side, but also of the social development of humanity, basically.
Great, thank you. Marcos?
No, I think COVID for sure highlighted the inequality here in the region. Brazil was an example with kids out of school and most of them without access to high-speed internet to follow classes from home. So this is something, that it's clearly not doing well in the region in terms of really access to high-speed internet, high access to equipment, and not even from the kids and students side, but also from the schools. I guess in Brazil, many of them didn't also have the proper equipment to have their classes online during the pandemic. So it wasn't good, the performance here in Brazil, more especially, which I was following more closely.
Right, thank you. Marcos, I want to stick with you if I can, just to conclude. I mean, if you could just maybe share with us a little bit more about Brazil and how you're seeing this, the next, 10 months and the election and what looks like, certainly a good chance, according to the polls, that Lula would come back, and just, as it relates to the issues we've been discussing, and to the extent you feel comfortable in just talking about Brazil, I think there's a lot of interest in what might happen there.
Yeah, I think it's too early right now to speculate who's in front here on the polls. For sure, Lula will be a strong contender, but what we can for sure expect, and as I said at the beginning, we should expect a lot of volatility in stock markets, bond markets, and also exchange rates until the election for sure. And in a moment where inflation is high, not only in Brazil, obviously, but I think that will amplify some of the problems for the economy that could lead to, even higher interest rates, which are already increasing.
Right.
But as I said at the beginning, I'm not worried about credit quality, at least for the companies we rate. I guess Joe and Diego gave some numbers here, but from our side here in Brazil, we have only right now 8% of companies with negative outlooks. And that was about 30% at the beginning of the pandemic, or at the peak of the pandemic. So that shows that we are confident that balance sheets are strong, liquidity is good, and companies are, ready to face that volatility in 22.
Terrific. Well, this has been a really terrific session, really interesting. I learned so much from all of you, and also it's put me in a better mood than I've been recently since many of you, and I want to thank you for that. I really am grateful to all of you for pointing out, I think, some of the positive things about what corporates have done in terms of, in terms of adjustments during a very difficult period. I think that's grounds for some optimism and some hope in an otherwise, on some of the political dimensions, a little bit more uncertain outlook. So I think this has been extremely useful, and I just want to thank Rina and Diego and Joe and Marcos for their excellent contributions and reflections. I want to give special thanks to Latin Trade for organizing this section. I think it was very, 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 very illuminating, and thanks to Santiago Gutierrez. So we'll be following, all of us will be following what's happened very closely, and none of us, I guarantee, is going to be bored. So at least that's the good news. And the last thing we want to do is be bored. And in that sense, Latin America never disappoints. So thank you all very much. Stay well and stay healthy, and really enjoyed it. Take care.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Michael.
Thank you very
Michael.
much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.